Daniela Norris with O Books Presents podcast and interview series. We publish great books on the mind, body, spirit connection. And my guest today is Sam Glory, author of I'll Meet You at the Lost and Found. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Daniela. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So this is a really intriguing title. I love it. I'll Meet You at the Lost and Found, a guide to living from the context of your inner self. What is the book about?
The book is really about learning to look beyond the illusion of who we think we are and move away from the absolute identification that we have grown to have with our ego self. So it's really about to convert our search for happiness to something internal instead of reaching outside and feeling disempowered, perhaps when this isn't provided to us. And if we look around our culture and society, they teach us very early on to look externally for this type of validation, which really enslaves us into believing that we in ourselves aren't and shouldn't be able to generate that contentment from within, and that it is a pursuit rather than something we already have unconditionally. And we live in this era nowadays where hedonism has become most people's religion. So it's really about shifting that perception from desire, which is really directly linked to ego, and move towards the unconditional, that state of uncompromised happiness that we inherently all have within us. And the book is really about drawing the curtain on that illusion. It's about empowerment. It's about recognizing the guru within, and to unlearn many of the detrimental thought processes that we have sort of acquired through life, and that are infringing and even negating our ability to really unconditionally love ourselves.
Sam, you're a young author. This is your first book. So when did your spiritual journey actually start?
So, yeah, good question. I was actually raised by atheists. So although I was incredibly connected to different sort of reality, for me, the thought process of what I was experiencing was really entirely internalized and not something perceived as normal at the time, which was actually really lucky for me, because when you don't have anyone to turn to, it forces you to look inwardly for answers. And I often think back at this about the importance of reaching inside for the guru that we all have within us, especially when nothing around us seems to make much sense, because that's when we begin to listen out for that faint voice that we call intuition. We still live in this era where if we aren't forced to make this connection, we most often do not choose to ignore it. We follow and recreate instead of creating, and we aren't taught to retain this ability that we all have when we are children. Instead, we get it completely stripped from us from very early on, only for much later on in life to long for it extremely desperately. For me specifically, the turning point was when I read some Brian Weiss and Wayne Dyer when I was around 13 years old. And at the time, I thought that I'd finally found someone that was actually describing what I had been feeling all along. And I guess it was the beginning of a spiritual exploration for me to try and piece the bits together. And yeah, once I realized that there was others out there that felt a connection to something else, instead of the limitation of our ego persona, it became really exciting to discover more and more about who I really was and had been all along. But yeah, it took me many more years before it all really took hold and gained the momentum it's reached today. I think I, like many other people, internalized this side of me almost completely through my teenage years and early 20s. And I think also back then the world was also less forgiving and not as open to holistic ideas as it is nowadays. So I then finally was able to come out of the spiritual closet only a few years ago. And even though I must say the word spiritual has in itself so many associations and connotations that bear this really old energy filled with cliches, which is partly also why I'm trying to help reshape this association. I think the whole perception of what spirituality actually is and can be needs to be broken down and reassessed immensely, and really bring into focus what self-actualization actually means. to have an integrative self-awareness that transcends the ego limitation to the 21st century is probably one of the biggest and most important spiritual, in between brackets, project that we have ever had to do. But yeah, circling back to the original line of thought, the awareness of being connected to something bigger than just my identification with the ego, for me, had always been there. But the actual commitment to be the uncompromised version of myself probably only came in recent years. And yeah,
So
here
religion,
yeah.
sorry, religion today is not so big as it used to be, and young people today are looking elsewhere. And in your experience, where are they looking?
Exactly, they are looking for more divergent, holistic ideas. But that's funny you're asking, because where are they looking? And I think it's quite funny that you asked that, because it's again about that search, isn't it? It's about getting there wherever there is, externalizing. Only the other day I saw an ad of Facebook that sold freedom, something along the lines of, do you want to be free? In whatever context it could be related to, it could be doctrine, relationships, religious, financially, you name it. And these days people really resonate with these type of messages, because there is this sickness in our society that have made people scream for change, for freedom, to break out of the matrix, so to speak. But when we externalize and search for this freedom, it becomes something that is based on a mental dissonance that is rooted on lack, on scarcity, really. And without getting too much into the law of resonance here, it is a given that anything that is based on a deficiency isn't going to be sustainable in the end. On the other hand, if this practice becomes internalized, if this search for freedom and happiness is internalized, we realize actually that we're already free. In fact, we've always been. And this is what I was touching briefly upon before, about a shift that many of us are experiencing. I think a lot of people are awakening now to see that that they've been free all along. And some people are looking to be free, whilst others already know that they are, and that divides us in a way. We see people awakening to the true potential and wanting more, and knowing that they are and can more than what our societies have told them. And yeah, it's all really exciting, and it's a really exciting time that we're living in now.
So reading Brian Weiss and Wayne Dyer at the age of 13 is pretty impressive, because I don't know many 13-year-olds who search at that age for answers. What made you write your own book, which is for young adults, new adults, also for adults, of course, but for anybody who wants to understand more about spirituality?
Yeah, so I would like to say that I think most of everything that has been said in relation to our spiritual evolution has really already been said throughout history. We're not really coming up with anything groundbreaking that hasn't been told before. Ancient truth and spiritual connection has been around ever since the beginning. So even when we look through history, we've gone in circles a few times. We were empowered, then we lost the connection as the ego grew in strength. Then some truth came in the form of what we nowadays call guru channeling or sacred text. They were in turn modified, corrupted into doctrines and religious context, which really again fed on the control and fear, because we lost the connection completely. We came to believe that we weren't good enough and started to look outside of ourselves. That's what I was trying to explain before regarding the internalized search or the external search for happiness. That awareness of our evolutionary path had always been present in humanity. And if we look around for content, there is an absolute countless range of spiritual self-development books out there that are phenomenal. They are comprehensive, enlightened, and I think most people can understand a lot of the material they read from a mental perspective, because in the moment they read it, it makes sense. But actually taking it a step further and integrating it into their daily lives, it's a completely different story. And for me as a writer, it's all about, how do I make this tangible? How can we show these pearls of wisdom that have been around for thousands of years already, and present it in a way that doesn't just stop at an intellectual level? And I think that being inspired often has a correlation between our own immediate life situations and what we hear or read about. So if what we read is presented in a perhaps dense or convoluted way, it becomes harder for many to integrate it on a day-to-day basis. And the funny thing is that most of our so-called personal development and spiritual journey is more about unlearning what we've come to believe is true rather than learning something new. And because of that, the clearer the connection between how our ego mind and our true self interact is presented. And here I mean on a stark, granular level, the easier it becomes to actually implement any changes. So yeah, for me, it's really about turning and present self-actualization from a more simplistic viewpoint and dismiss the need of our ego to complicate or dramatize what is actually quite straightforward, if only we stop resisting, as what we resist persists.
So I'll meet you at a lost and found is a manual, right? For those who wish to integrate a heightened state of self-awareness. How is that? How would that work?
It's really about unlearning. It's establishing this connection that we all have since we are children that we then forget about when we grow older. It's a manual to reconnect to that part of us that is always present with us, but that we haven't really paid attention to. That our ego doesn't want us to look at. And as that progresses, as we get more open to listening to that side of us, it gets easier to understand who we really are. And I think this book hopefully can improve that connection for some people.
So if you had to give one bit of advice from the book or not from the book about how can people start walking on that path, people who are already not perhaps spiritually aware but would like to understand more about the process, what advice would you have for them?
That's a good one. I think the most important aspect of learning to really truly and consciously love yourself is to get out of your mind a little bit more. This our society we live in now is very mind mattered. It's all about how much do we know and how much can we remember. It's not very in touch with the heart very much. And I think that's the first step to actually get back to who we really are and at the core of our humanity, and really listen to that inner voice that is really dying to catch our attention. Not for nothing, depression is the world's leading illness, and I think that tells a lot about how mind mattered our society have come to be. And it is an opportunity. I would say depression is an opportunity to really draw the curtain behind that illusion that we have so closely identified ourselves with. So I think the first tip is definitely to start listening to the notes that our inner self is trying to tell us.
And how do we do that? I mean, is it through meditation, or is it how did you start doing that?
I think we're all very different in the way that we take in information from ourselves, but I think definitely meditation is one of the probably the easiest and quickest way to establish a connection, because as I mentioned before, without the mind, that connection it's really the only way you can really listen to who you really are with the absence of the mind. So definitely meditation is one of the most powerful techniques that one can use, especially in the beginning of the spiritual path.
And I see you're on one hand you wrote a very spiritual book. On the other hand, I see you're very active on social media, and you have a beautiful website, which is samglory.com. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, thank you.
So how does that go? Because I know many young people today are so focused on the social media that they don't have time, for example, to see beyond that. They're more interested in the persona, in how people perceive them, rather than in who they really are and connecting to themselves. So how can we, from your experience with social media and with being spiritual, how can we bring these two sides together?
Yes, that's a really good question. In general, I think I need to go back a little bit here, but in general, before when I started on this path, I felt that both the writers and the audience for such content were much older than myself at the time. And while I couldn't have done any of the things that I'm doing now without my literary and spiritual heroes backing me up, I felt that it could be adapted to reach a younger demographic of people that were now awakening at a much younger age and needed something that resonated with them in a way they could find relatable and engaging. And like you said, I think we live in an era where information and thought is being shared in an almost instantaneous way, which means that many more people are being exposed to more transpersonal psychological ideas, meaning that what was once almost reserved for a very small minority of people is now being divulged on a far bigger scale, which also means that the way that much of the content is presented needs to be somewhat edited and refitted to match the current age that we live in. It needs to be palpable and relatable. It's about turning the cliches into something that we can use in our real lives when we go about our routines, not something that we think or feel when we're in the zone or on the occasional Sunday afternoon after having watched Oprah. It's about, I think, integration in our lives now is really the key for lasting change and ultimately our evolution. And I think social media has proven to be an extremely important tool in divulging information and ideas, but there obviously needs to be a balance between looking outside, being inspired, and actually taking the connection further and establish something within yourself. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always felt that the internet and social media, I mean, I know it has downsides, but on the other hand, it connects everybody. So in a way, it's a collective consciousness, and obviously there can be
Exactly.
positives
Yes.
and negatives to it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. When we back in the 90s, it was just difficult to find anything on anything remotely spiritual. So it's social media has definitely paved way to a whole new world of information exchange, and I think it's gaining momentum as to speak, but I think it's gonna go much faster from now on, and we're gonna see some changes that are unparalleled compared to what we've experienced before in our evolution. So that's definitely thanks to this social media momentum.
And I have another question about your book, I'll Meet You at the Lost and Found. You offer exercises
Yes.
to help navigate through our spiritual journeys. Can you give an example of one exercise that perhaps people could try at home?
Yes, absolutely. I think this ties again back into the whole perception of spiritual content to be intangible, and I think exercises brings that the connection between something that can be philosophically accepted or understood even, but also practiced into your life. One specific exercise, let me think. I do have one. I think that would be very good for people just starting out on their spiritual path, and that is just really reconnecting with their heart. And it sounds a bit, perhaps it sounds a bit like a cliche. What does that exactly mean? Is how do I listen to that? But it's a true meditation, and the book does provide how to establish that link a little bit, in a bit more detail. But I think exercising, meditation, and a higher self-awareness on a daily basis, it's really what the book is all about. And many of the exercises do facilitate this connection.
Wonderful. Well, your book has been described as a down-to-earth book, and it's fantastic for the beginner or less experienced spiritual people among us, but also for those who are perhaps on the spiritual path, but would like to share it with the younger generation. Is there any way that readers can connect with you, perhaps, if they have questions or they want to learn more about the book?
Oh, absolutely. That would be incredible. I'm always really interested and fascinated to hear what people, how they experience their spiritual journey. They can absolutely reach me via my website. I am also present on Instagram. Twitter and Facebook.
What are the handles and the website is samglory.com, is that correct?
That's my website, that's right. And Inner Self Living is the handle on Instagram and Twitter as well as Facebook.
Wonderful. That is really fascinating, Sam. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to those listening to us?
Just to honor what comes naturally. Nothing needs to be forced, and everything comes at the right time for everyone. And there is a reason for the situation that we may find ourselves in our lives. To just continue to honor yourselves and to be in
Continue to
touch with
honor
your
yourselves. Absolutely.
yeah. That's great. Thank you very much for having me, Daniela.
Thank you so much for being with us today. This is Daniela Norris on O Books Presents podcast and interview series. And my guest today was Sam Glory, author of I'll Meet You at the Lost and Found. You can find her book at your favorite bookshop or order it online and visit Sam's website www.samglory.com. Thank you for listening.